Welcome to Paranormal Pages. Let's get straight into the true scary stories. Story 1. Echoes in the Night. The first time I heard the footsteps, I thought it was a dream. It had been 5 years since Emily passed, and the weight of her absence still pressed on my chest every night. But that night, as I lay in bed, the familiar sound of her tiny feet padding down the hallway jolted me awake. My heart pounded as I stared at the ceiling, refusing to believe what I knew was impossible. She was gone. Emily was gone. And yet, the sound persisted, soft and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. I sat up slowly, straining to hear over the deafening silence that had settled in our home since the accident. The hallway light flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. My breath hitched as I saw a small silhouette move past the doorway, just out of sight. "Emily?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. No response came, only the faint echo of her footsteps growing fainter. Compelled by a force I couldn't name, I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood. The floor was cold beneath my feet, grounding me in the reality of the moment. I took a tentative step forward, then another, each one feeling like a mile. My hands shook as I reached for the door, the wood cool and smooth under my fingers. Slowly, I opened it, the creak of the hinges sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. The hallway stretched out before me, dimly lit and empty. I walked slowly, the old wooden floorboards creaking under my weight. The sound of Emily's footsteps seemed to lead me, growing louder as I neared her old bedroom. I paused outside the door, my heart pounding in my ears. It was closed, just as I had left it that morning. I hadn't entered her room since the funeral, unable to face the memories it held. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open. The room was untouched, a time capsule of her short life. Toys were scattered on the floor, her favorite teddy bear sitting on the bed. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting a pale glow over everything. And then, I saw her. Emily, standing by the window, looking out into the night. Her back was to me, but I knew it was her. The same long, dark hair, the same pink nightgown she loved. "Emily?" I called again, my voice trembling. She didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge me in any way. I took a step closer, my hand outstretched. "Emily, it's Daddy." She turned slowly, her eyes meeting mine. For a moment, everything felt right again, as if she had never left. But then, her eyes. They were empty, hollow, filled with a darkness that sent chills down my spine. "Daddy," she said, her voice echoing strangely, as if coming from a great distance. "Why did you leave me?" I froze, unable to move or speak. Tears filled my eyes as I reached out to her. "I didn't, sweetie. I'm right here." Her expression didn't change. She took a step towards me, and the room grew colder. "You left me," she repeated, her voice growing stronger, more accusing. "You let me die." I tried to explain, to make her understand, but the words stuck in my throat. Before I could speak, she turned and ran, disappearing into the shadows. I chased after her, my heart racing, but the hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, the sound of her footsteps echoing around me. Just as I was about to reach her, everything went dark. I woke up back in my bed, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. It was a dream. It had to be. But as I lay there, catching my breath, I heard it again. The soft patter of her feet coming down the hall. Hey, subscribe for more scary stories. The days that followed blurred into one another. I tried to convince myself that the footsteps were just a manifestation of my grief, a cruel trick played by a mind unable to let go. Yet, each night, the pattern repeated. The soft patter of Emily's feet echoed through the hall, growing louder and more insistent. Sleep became an elusive companion, replaced by a constant, gnawing dread. During the day, I buried myself in work, trying to outrun the shadows that haunted me. But no matter how busy I kept myself, the moment night fell, the fear crept back in. I began avoiding her room entirely, the door remaining closed as a silent reminder of the loss. Yet, the footsteps always seemed to lead me back there, to the heart of my sorrow. One evening, after another sleepless night, I decided to confide in my best friend, Mark. We met at a small, dimly lit bar on the outskirts of town, a place we used to frequent before life became so unbearably complicated. As we sat in a corner booth, nursing our drinks, I told him everything. The footsteps, the dream, the cold presence in the house. Mark listened intently, his expression a mix of concern and skepticism. "It sounds like you're under a lot of stress, John," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Grief can play strange tricks on our minds. Maybe you should see someone, a therapist, to help you through this." I nodded, knowing he was right, but the fear in my chest was too real to dismiss. "It feels so real, Mark. Every night, it feels like she's there. Like she's trying to tell me something." Mark leaned back, his eyes thoughtful. "Have you considered that maybe she is? Maybe there's something unresolved, something she needs you to understand." The thought lingered in my mind long after we parted ways. What if Mark was right? What if Emily was trying to reach out to me from beyond, seeking closure for something I had overlooked? The idea both terrified and intrigued me. That night, instead of avoiding her room, I sat outside the door, waiting. As the clock struck midnight, the footsteps began again. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest. This time, instead of running away, I opened the door and stepped inside. The room was colder than before, the air thick with an unspoken tension. I stood there, waiting, as the footsteps grew louder, closer. Then, she appeared. Emily stood in the middle of the room, her eyes fixed on me. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice tinged with sadness. "Why did you let me die?" The guilt and pain I had buried deep within me surged to the surface. "I didn't want to, Emily. It was an accident. I tried to save you, I really did." She shook her head slowly, her eyes filled with an unfathomable sorrow. "You weren't there when I needed you." The memory of that fateful day crashed over me like a wave. The car accident, the sound of metal crunching, the helplessness as I watched my daughter slip away. Tears streamed down my face as I fell to my knees. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I'm so sorry." Emily's form flickered, her expression softening for a brief moment. "Help me, Daddy. Find me." Before I could respond, she vanished, leaving me alone in the cold, empty room. The weight of her words hung heavily in the air. Find her? What did she mean? I knew I couldn't face this alone. I needed help to understand what was happening, to uncover the truth behind Emily's restless spirit. As I rose to leave the room, I glanced back at her teddy bear on the bed, its button eyes glinting in the moonlight. Determination replaced the fear in my heart. I would find out what Emily needed. I would bring her peace, no matter the cost. The following day, I contacted Dr. Evelyn Shaw, a renowned parapsychologist with a reputation for investigating supernatural phenomena. Her credentials and calm demeanor reassured me, and I hoped she could provide the answers I desperately needed. I invited her to the house, explaining the situation as best as I could without sounding completely deranged. Dr. Shaw arrived in the late afternoon, her presence exuding a quiet confidence. She was a tall, slender woman with sharp features and piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through me. As she stepped into the house, she paused, closing her eyes as if sensing something in the air. "There is definitely a presence here," she said softly. "Let's find out what it wants." We began our investigation in Emily's room. Dr. Shaw moved methodically, her equipment humming and beeping as she took readings. I stood by, my anxiety mounting with each passing second. "Do you believe in ghosts?" I asked, needing to hear her say it. She looked up from her instruments, her expression serious. "I believe in unresolved energies. Sometimes, those energies manifest as what we perceive as ghosts. Your daughter might be one of them." As the sun set, casting long shadows through the house, Dr. Shaw set up a series of cameras and recording devices. "We're going to try to communicate with her," she explained. "If she has a message, we need to give her a way to deliver it." Night fell, and the house grew eerily silent. We sat in Emily's room, the glow of the recording devices the only light. Dr. Shaw began the session, speaking softly. "Emily, if you are here with us, can you give us a sign?" For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, the temperature in the room dropped sharply. I shivered, my breath visible in the cold air. The teddy bear on Emily's bed shifted slightly, as if nudged by an invisible hand. Dr. Shaw's eyes widened, but she remained composed. "Emily, we are here to help. What do you need us to do?" A faint whisper filled the room, almost too soft to hear. "Find me," the voice said, echoing the words I had heard before. My heart raced as I recognized Emily's voice. "Find you where, Emily?" Dr. Shaw pressed gently. "Can you show us?" The room grew colder still, and the whisper came again, more insistent. "The woods. By the old oak tree." I felt a chill run down my spine. The old oak tree was a place Emily loved to play. It was also the place where the accident had happened. I had never gone back there since that day. Dr. Shaw placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "We'll go together. It seems that's where the answers lie." We left the house and made our way to the woods, the moon casting a pale light over the landscape. The old oak tree loomed ahead, its gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. As we approached, I felt a growing sense of dread. The memories of that day flooded back, the sound of Emily's laughter, the screech of tires, the silence that followed. Dr. Shaw began scanning the area with her equipment, the devices beeping softly. "There's something here," she murmured. "Something buried." With a deep breath, I started digging at the base of the tree, my hands trembling. The ground was hard and unyielding, but I kept going, driven by a desperate need for closure. After what felt like an eternity, my fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. I unearthed a small, rusted tin box. My heart pounded as I pried it open, revealing a collection of photographs and a worn, leather-bound journal. The photographs were of Emily, smiling and happy, but it was the journal that caught my attention. I opened it, scanning the pages filled with my late wife's handwriting. One entry stood out, dated just days before the accident. "I fear for Emily's safety. There is something in these woods, something dark and dangerous. I must protect her at all costs." A sense of dread settled over me. What had my wife known? What had she been trying to protect Emily from? I looked at Dr. Shaw, who was reading over my shoulder. Her expression was grave. "It seems there's more to this than just a tragic accident. We need to uncover the truth." As we stood there, the air grew colder, and a whisper echoed through the trees. "Find me," it said, filled with a sorrowful urgency. Emily's spirit was not at rest. We needed to go deeper, to face the darkness that had taken her from me. The discovery of my late wife's journal weighed heavily on my mind. There was something sinister lurking in these woods, something that had eluded me all these years. Determined to uncover the truth, Dr. Shaw and I spent the next few days poring over the journal, trying to piece together the puzzle. My wife had written about strange occurrences, shadowy figures, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. The entries became more frantic, more desperate, as she sought to protect Emily from an unseen threat. One night, as I sat in Emily's room, her voice came to me again. "Daddy, please find me." The sadness and fear in her words were unmistakable. I knew then that the time for answers was running out. Whatever darkness resided in the woods, it had taken Emily from me, and it was time to face it. Dr. Shaw and I returned to the old oak tree, armed with the journal and a renewed sense of purpose. As we approached, the air grew heavy with tension, the shadows deeper and more menacing. We stood at the base of the tree, the journal clutched tightly in my hand. "Emily," I called out, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at my insides. "We're here. Show us what we need to do." The ground beneath us began to tremble, and a cold wind swept through the trees, carrying with it the faint sound of Emily's laughter. Dr. Shaw's equipment buzzed and beeped frantically, detecting a surge of supernatural energy. "John, something's happening," she said, her voice taut with anticipation. A soft glow emanated from the base of the tree, illuminating a hidden path that seemed to lead deeper into the woods. "Follow the light," Dr. Shaw instructed, her eyes wide with wonder. We moved cautiously, the glow guiding us through the dense underbrush until we reached a small, secluded clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a stone altar, weathered and covered in moss. It radiated an eerie, malevolent energy that sent chills down my spine. "This is it," Dr. Shaw said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is where it happened." I approached the altar, the weight of the past pressing down on me. The journal had mentioned this place, describing rituals performed to ward off the darkness. My wife had been right to be afraid. "Emily," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I'm here. Show me how to save you." A figure materialized before me, translucent and shimmering in the moonlight. It was Emily, but different. Her eyes were filled with a sadness that spoke of years of suffering. "Daddy," she said, her voice echoing through the clearing. "You need to break the curse." Dr. Shaw stepped forward, her expression one of determination. "John," the journal mentioned a ritual. "We need to perform it to release Emily's spirit." I nodded, my hands trembling as I flipped through the journal to find the right passage. The instructions were clear but ominous, requiring a sacrifice of something precious. My heart ached as I realized what I had to do. I took off my wedding ring, the last tangible connection to my wife, and placed it on the altar. The ground trembled again, and a dark figure emerged from the shadows, its form shifting and writhing. It was the embodiment of the darkness that had taken Emily, a malevolent force that had haunted our family for years. "You cannot save her," it hissed, its voice a twisted mockery of humanity. Summoning all my courage, I began the ritual, reciting the words from the journal. The figure howled in rage, its form distorting as the power of the ritual took hold. Emily's spirit glowed brighter, her eyes pleading. "Daddy, hurry!" With a final, desperate plea, I completed the ritual. The darkness shrieked and writhed, its form dissolving into the night. Emily's spirit began to fade, a look of peace replacing the sorrow in her eyes. "Thank you, Daddy," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "I can rest now." As her spirit disappeared, the clearing returned to its quiet, serene state. The weight of years of grief and guilt lifted from my shoulders. I turned to Dr. Shaw, who gave me a nod of approval. "You did it, John. You freed her." But as we made our way back to the house, a nagging fear lingered in my mind. Had we truly vanquished the darkness, or was it merely biding its time, waiting to return? The question haunted me, casting a long shadow over my newfound peace. As we approached the house, the sound of Emily's footsteps echoed one last time, a soft patter that faded into the night. I looked up at the moonlit sky, a sense of foreboding settling in. The battle might be over, but the war against the darkness was far from won. Subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 2. The handprints on the inside. The storm began the night I moved into the old Victorian house, a relic from a bygone era nestled at the edge of town. The real estate agent had been eager to close the deal, offering a price that seemed too good to be true. I dismissed my initial misgivings as jitters, chalking it up to the excitement of starting fresh after the divorce. The house, with its towering spires and intricate woodwork, seemed to promise a new beginning. Thunder rolled in the distance as I unpacked the last of my boxes in the dimly lit living room. The rain tapped insistently against the windows, each droplet a tiny hammer driving away the silence. I paused for a moment, looking out at the heavy rain cascading down the window panes, creating a foggy veil. It was then that I saw it, the faint outline of a handprint on the inside of the glass. At first, I thought it was my imagination, a trick of the light. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. The handprint was still there, clearer now, with droplets of water tracing the shape of each finger. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the print was too small to be mine, more fitting for a child's hand. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely rising above a whisper. There was no answer, only the steady drumming of the rain. I took a hesitant step closer, my breath fogging up the glass further. The handprint seemed to grow clearer, almost as if it was reaching out to me. I shook my head, trying to dispel the growing unease. "It's just condensation," I muttered to myself. "Old houses have quirks." But as I turned away, the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Something about the print felt wrong, out of place. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the air crisp and the ground soggy. I decided to explore the rest of the house, hoping to distract myself from the eerie incident. The narrow hallways and creaky floors added to the house's charm, but there was a pervasive sense of melancholy that I couldn't shake. Each room seemed to hold secrets, the walls whispering stories of the past. In the attic, I found an old chest covered in dust and cobwebs. Inside were faded photographs, letters, and a worn-out journal. The pictures showed a happy family, a man, a woman, and a little girl with a bright smile. As I flipped through the journal, the entries grew increasingly erratic, the handwriting frantic. They spoke of strange occurrences, unexplained noises, and shadows that moved on their own. One entry caught my eye, the handprints. They started appearing after the accident. "I can feel her presence. She's trapped here, and she wants to be free." A sudden noise made me jump. It was coming from the living room. I rushed down the stairs, my heart pounding. The sight that greeted me made my blood run cold. Every window in the living room was covered in small, ghostly handprints, all on the inside. I stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the multitude of handprints. The room seemed to grow colder, an oppressive chill that wrapped around me like a shroud. My mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation, but each possibility felt more absurd than the last. The memories of the journal entries flashed through my mind, the frantic scrawl about the handprints and the presence in the house. The ringing of my phone snapped me back to reality. I fumbled to answer it, my hands shaking. "Hello?" "Hey, it's Laura," came the familiar voice of my sister. "Just checking in to see how the move went." I tried to steady my voice. "It's fine. The house is great." There was a pause on the other end. "You don't sound fine. Is everything okay?" I glanced back at the windows, the handprints glaringly evident. "Yeah, just settling in. It's an old house, you know? Lots of quirks. Well, if you need anything, you know I'm just a call away." "Thanks, Laura," I said, trying to sound more convincing. "I'll talk to you later." I hung up and took a deep breath. I needed to figure this out. Determined, I grabbed a cloth and approached the windows. As I wiped away the prints, a sense of dread washed over me. Each handprint vanished with a smear, but it felt like erasing something much more significant. When the last print was gone, I stood back, hoping that would be the end of it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak and groan of the house set my nerves on edge. The wind howled outside, and I pulled the covers tighter around me, feeling like a child again, hiding from the monsters under the bed. Just as I began to drift off, I heard it, a soft, mournful sobbing. I sat up, my heart pounding. The sound was faint but unmistakable, echoing through the stillness of the house. I followed the noise, my steps cautious, my breath shallow. It led me to the hallway, where the sobbing grew louder, more desperate. I reached the end of the hall and found myself facing a closed door, one I hadn't explored yet. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door and stepped into a small, dusty room. The sobbing stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence. I scanned the room, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. There, in the corner, stood an old rocking chair, its wooden frame creaking slightly as it moved on its own. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The air grew colder, and I felt a presence, something unseen yet undeniably there. I took a step back, my pulse racing. The room felt suffocating, the walls closing in. I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind me, trapping me inside. Panic surged through me as I pounded on the door, desperate to escape. Suddenly, the sobbing resumed, louder and more anguished than before. It was coming from behind me. I turned slowly, my eyes wide with fear. In the rocking chair, a figure began to materialize, a little girl, her form translucent and ghostly. Her eyes were hollow, her expression one of sorrow and longing. She reached out a hand toward me, her voice a whisper on the wind. "Help me." I stumbled back, my mind reeling. "Who are you?" I managed to choke out. "Trapped," she whispered, her voice echoing in the small room. "Can't leave, the handprints, they're mine." I felt a cold hand brush against my cheek, and the room began to spin. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the girl's sad, pleading eyes. I woke up on the floor of the small room, my head throbbing. The ghostly girl was gone, but the rocking chair still swayed gently. The memory of her sorrowful eyes lingered in my mind, and her whispered plea echoed in my ears, "Help me." Gathering my strength, I stood up and took a deep breath. The air was no longer icy cold, but a sense of unease remained. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to revisit the attic and the old journal. Perhaps there was something I had missed. Climbing the narrow stairs to the attic, I tried to ignore the growing sense of dread. The storm outside had calmed, but the house still felt alive with unseen forces. I opened the chest and retrieved the journal, flipping through its pages with newfound urgency. Among the frantic entries, one in particular stood out. March 15th, Anna won't stop crying. Ever since the accident, she's been restless, her spirit unable to find peace. I don't know how to help her. The handprints are a sign, she's reaching out from the other side. But why? What does she need? The entry was followed by several blank pages, as if the writer had given up or something had happened to prevent further writing. I closed the journal, my mind racing. Anna, the little girl in the photographs, must have died in this house, and her spirit was trapped, trying to communicate. I decided to search the house for any clues about the accident mentioned in the journal. Starting with the basement, I made my way through the labyrinthine corridors, the dim light from my flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. The basement was cluttered with old furniture, dusty boxes, and forgotten relics. As I moved a stack of boxes, I uncovered an old newspaper clipping. "Tragic accident claims young life," the headline read. I scanned the article, my heart sinking. It detailed a horrific accident involving a fire that broke out in the house years ago. Anna, the young daughter of the previous owners, had been trapped inside. Despite their desperate attempts, they couldn't save her. The article mentioned that her parents moved away shortly after, unable to bear the loss. A wave of sorrow washed over me. Anna's spirit was tied to this house, her young life cut short in a tragic accident. She was crying out for help, trying to find peace. I needed to find a way to release her from this limbo. As I left the basement, I heard a faint humming. Following the sound, I was led back to the living room. There, standing by the window, was Anna. Her figure was more distinct now, less translucent. She turned to face me, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and sadness. "Help me," she repeated, her voice stronger this time. "I will, Anna," I promised, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at me. "I need to know what you want. How can I help you find peace?" She pointed to the old fireplace, where a small box lay hidden behind the grate. I retrieved it, my hands trembling. Inside were charred remnants of what appeared to be personal belongings, a locket, a small diary, and a photograph of Anna and her parents. As I examined the items, the air around me grew colder. Anna's presence felt stronger, more urgent. Her diary contained childlike scribbles and drawings, but one entry caught my eye. "Mommy said the locket will keep us together forever. It's special." I held up the locket, understanding dawning on me. Anna's spirit was anchored to these items, her connection to her family and the life she lost. I needed to find a way to release her spirit and let her move on. "Anna," I said softly, "I'm going to help you. I'll make sure you can be with your family again." Her eyes brightened, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the happy child she once was. As I prepared to perform the ritual that would set her free, the room grew darker, shadows creeping along the walls. The atmosphere shifted, and I realized I wasn't alone. something else was here, something that didn't want Anna to leave. The darkness around me seemed to pulse with malevolent intent. Shadows twisted and stretched, forming shapes that slithered and darted across the room. Anna's ghostly figure flickered, her face etched with fear. I clutched the locket tightly, my heart racing. Whatever malevolent force was in the house, it was determined to keep her trapped. A cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the faint glow of the fireplace. I stumbled back, my breath visible in the frigid air. The oppressive presence grew stronger, pressing down on me like a tangible weight. In the darkness, I could see two glowing eyes staring at me, filled with rage and malice. "Leave her," a deep, guttural voice echoed. "She belongs to us." I steeled myself, refusing to be intimidated. "No, she doesn't. She's just a child. She deserves peace." The shadows coiled tighter, forming a dark, hulking figure. It loomed over me, its eyes burning with hatred. "You cannot take her from us. She is ours." Anna's voice broke through the darkness, filled with a mix of fear and determination. "Please, help me." Drawing on every ounce of courage, I held up the locket. "Anna, focus on this. Remember the love of your family. Let it guide you." The shadows shrieked, recoiling from the light that began to emanate from the locket. The warmth and love embedded in the small piece of jewelry acted as a beacon, cutting through the malevolent darkness. Anna's figure glowed brighter, her form becoming more solid. The dark entity roared, lashing out with tendrils of shadow. They wrapped around me, pulling me towards the darkness. I struggled, the cold seeping into my bones. "Anna!" I cried out, my voice strained. "You have to fight. Remember your family." Anna's eyes locked onto mine, and she nodded. She stepped forward, her small hand reaching out to mine. As our hands touched, a surge of warmth flowed through me, driving back the cold. The shadows hissed and writhed, their power waning. With a final burst of strength, I focused on the love and protection symbolized by the locket. "Be free, Anna. Find your peace." The light from the locket intensified, filling the room with a blinding brilliance. The dark entity let out a final, anguished scream before disintegrating into nothingness. The oppressive weight lifted, and the room was filled with a serene silence. Anna's figure shimmered, her face radiant with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice echoing softly. Tears welled up in my eyes as I watched her form dissolve into the light, finally at peace. The handprints on the windows faded away, leaving the glass clear and unblemished. The warmth that remained in the room was a comforting reminder that she was free. Exhausted, I collapsed onto the floor, clutching the locket. The sense of relief was overwhelming, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something left to be done. The house, though now devoid of the malevolent presence, still felt heavy with history and loss. As I stood up, I heard a faint rustling sound. Turning, I saw the journal lying open on the floor, its pages fluttering as if caught in a gentle breeze. A final entry appeared, written in a hand that was not my own. "Thank you for setting her free. May you find peace in your own life as well." I smiled, a sense of closure washing over me. Anna was at peace, and the house felt lighter, almost welcoming. I knew I had to leave, but I also knew that I had done something important, something that mattered. As I walked out of the house, the morning sun breaking through the clouds, I felt a renewed sense of hope. The journey had been terrifying, but it had also been transformative. I had faced my fears and helped a lost soul find peace. But as I glanced back at the house one last time, I saw a figure standing in the window. It was Anna, her hand raised in a silent farewell. I waved back, feeling a connection that transcended time and space. And then, just as quickly as she appeared, she was gone. The house stood silent, its secrets now laid to rest. I walked away, the locket still warm in my hand, knowing that sometimes, the past must be confronted to find peace in the present. The end. Subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.